Hey Taryn, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Kayo. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How's your day been so far?
This is the beginning of it here in LA. So, yeah, so far so good, I suppose.
For sure, for sure. Well, it's good to see
Yeah.
you. Let the viewers know who you are, what you do, and why you do it, Taryn.
Sure. So, I am Taryn Newton-Gill. I'm a conscious dating and relationship coach and attachment expert. And so I help people overcome basically toxic relationship patterns. So people who find themselves regularly dating people who are emotionally unavailable, don't have their shit together, so to speak. I hope I can say that here. Um, who, make them feel bad about themselves, worse about themselves. Maybe they're emotionally abusive, or even I've had clients who come from real trauma of physical abuse in their past. Um, and I'm not a therapist, but what I help people do is understand why these patterns are happening to them through their attachment style, which is what base my entire practice around. And that really comes from my own experience of being in these types of relationships. I was regularly dating people who were, you know, alcoholics or had been in jail or, had, you know, children who had children and they were, barely 40, and, and it's was really confusing for me because I came from, a marriage where my parents are still together, a family where my parents are still together. I had great friendships. I was close with my family. And I'm like, why am I falling for these types of people over and over again? And at a certain point, when you're doing something over and over again, you have to say, how am I contributing to this situation?
Right.
Right. And and so for me, I was trying to follow all the dating rules or thinking like, oh, all the things I think that a lot of us start to question first, which is what's the matter with me? What's wrong with me? Um, am I not feminine enough? Am I not attractive enough? Am I not lovable? Am I too complicated? Am I too difficult? All those things were going through my mind, some at a conscious level, some at a subconscious level. But I kept hearing the phrase attachment style on podcasts like this because I've always loved podcasts. And people would kind of throw it around like everyone should know what it was. They would kind of say it in passing, as though it was just a given that other people understood what it was and they wouldn't really go too much in depth with it. But it really piqued my interest because it just like stood out to me as this term that I was curious about. And so I started to look into it. And the moment I did, just I like to say, learning your attachment style is like getting glasses after years of blurry vision. Because you had that experience, KO, yourself?
Well, like years of blurry vision, like when you don't necessarily see for yourself, like the situation you're in, but then when the clarity comes, it's like, yo, like how did I miss all that? Like, yeah. So I know where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, kind of like when they say, retrospect is 2020, that
Right,
when we look back, everything is clear.
right,
But I think with attachment, it just really made clear why I had been in these relationships when no one else could explain it to me.
right.
When I had no understanding for why I couldn't keep a relationship going, or when I did, they weren't good, or if I did, the one or two longer relationships I had, they were mean to me, and why was I allowing that to happen? And, I know a lot of coaches out there um, talk about attachment as, you know, a component, the way they would like it's another lens to look at yourself with, kind of the way we use astrology as a lens, right? Kind of learning your attachment styles, like learning your astrological sign. And I just think that's really reducing it because I think it plays so much more of a role, a more of a foundational role than we really most people realize, even people who do understand a little bit about attachment. Um, and to me, when I finally understood what it was, I understood myself on a whole new level. I understood everyone on a whole new level. My clients always are like, "Oh my goodness, like I see attachment everywhere now. Like I can't unsee it." You know, because it shows up in work relationships, in your daily interactions, in relationships with your family, with your friends. And it also is in your relationship with yourself, right? And so it's such a huge part, specifically, though, in intimate relationships and romantic relationships. And that's where I really struggled. So that's the area I focus on. But when my clients and I do work together, it ripples through their entire life because it's really about your relationship with yourself and how safe you feel to show who you really are to someone else, right? In order to create the intimacy necessary to have a loving, lasting relationship.
Right. Yeah, so when you look back on your journey, like what was that moment that you decided like, okay, this is actually what I want to do? Like, I want to work with people with attachment styles and relationships. What was the trigger for you that made you feel like this is the moment that I want to get into this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was that, well, it was a combination, I think, of things. I had been a makeup artist for a lot of years, working with women and working closely with women. They're so close, you're like in their space, in their face, and you talk about things. And of course, relationships always came up, and I've always been a relationship person. I've always had really close friendships. I was, a peer mediator when I was a young kid. So I've always been the friend, the person that people feel safe talking to. Whenever I had a corporate job, I was always the person in the office people were coming to with their problems, who was trying to sort it out. I'm a people person. I think I'm able to make people feel seen and safe and understood, and I enjoy connecting with people in a meaningful way. And I think that when I started doing makeup, it felt like I'm making you feel beautiful, but it's very surface, and I realized I had a little feeling that I wanted to get deeper, but I actually had a few other jobs after being a makeup artist, trying to kind of find my passion, find my purpose. And after the pandemic, it was really, I had lost my, I was an art agent at that time. Makeup kind of led me to this art career. And everything had to shut down. And I had just started dating my husband 6 months before the pandemic, and we were planning to move in together right when it happened. And so we had been together for 6 months, and I had been really into attachment the year before that. As I had just started learning about it, I was dating him among a few other people at the time. And then he and we have a whole story, but we ended up, we were together like a year before that, split up for a little while, related to my attachment style, actually, and then started up back again 6 months before the pandemic. And then I was out of a job like the rest of the world. And it gave me time to kind of be and think and reflect. And the thing that just kept resounding in my head was attachment totally changed my life. Not only the way I was dating before I met my husband, but I met him within a year of me really exploring it and understanding it, which felt like proof to me that this is powerful, And so I allowed myself to just kind of listen to what I wanted to do. And I went online and I got my life coaching certification during the pandemic. And I just was like, so many people don't know about attachment, or they have a very surface understanding. And I kind of just wanted to scream it from the rooftops.
Right.
And so in that time, when I was able to really, ask myself what I wanted, I was like, I want to help other women so they don't have to suffer like I did for all those years. And so I had joined an online entrepreneurial organization at the time that was just had really inspiring content. And I started talking about attachment, and people started asking me to be on their podcasts, and it kind of just all came together, and I started taking on clients. And that was 4 years ago now. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I could definitely relate to like when people come and ask you questions about like their issues and relationships and things like that, and just being a natural problem solver, you incline to help them, and then that leads one thing leads to another, and then you
mhm.
find yourself coaching people. So yeah, that's a beautiful
Yeah.
journey that you've been on there. So like when we look at like our past relationships, you know, we've all had different struggles in previous relationships. You spoke about some of yours, like similar to the clients you help, you've had issues with people that were in and out of prison, that were like emotionally unavailable for you, and alcohol and things like that. What was those relationships like for you when you think back to it, and how did you navigate through those to get to where you are now?
I don't even know if I would call it navigating, because, going with that metaphor of putting on glasses, I felt blind, you know. And I think that is what happens to a lot of us is we get blindly attached to people, and I think that the culture we live in romanticizes love. It romanticizes romantic love. And so we all have, what I like to say, the fantasy person who lives in our head, and we often compare uh whoever we're dating against the fantasy in our head. I find that a lot of people who are coming from a fantasy mindset is what I call it.
Right,
Um, and so we kind of project who we want to be or who we, wish we were with or how we want to see ourselves, I think, onto people we find attractive and who we think we want to date. And to me, that's blind attachment. And I think that things are very confusing in that space because we're going after people for the wrong reasons. And that's what was always happening to me is I would be attracted to someone, of course, because I found them physically attractive, but they would be, really charismatic, or they would be like the quiet kind of stoic one who I had to uncover, and I didn't understand, oh, that's part of my need to get validation from someone, um that because I find them quiet or attractive, like to pull them in, like, and get them to like me is part of my own wounding, right? And so those kinds of relationships always ended up feeling very one-sided. It always felt like I was wanting more from the relationship than the person wanted to give. Like I had to chase them or convince them, or I had to hide different parts of myself to get them to like me. Everything was in the effort to get them to want me back.
right, right,
Right. Because what I didn't know what I was doing was operating from having an abandonment wound where I was so afraid of them leaving because it would invalidate my lovability that I would just attach to people even though they weren't reciprocating with me. And so those kinds of relationships, they're very painful. They're very lonely, because I'm not really sharing my insecurities with them because I'm so afraid my insecurities are going to push them away.
right, right, right.
Right. And I think to me, what I've learned with so many of my clients is that's a pattern that a lot of people can relate to, the trying to get people to want you back
Right.
because you're going after the wrong people.
Right, right. So almost like you're walking on eggshells, but really it's because you want to please someone so much that you're trying to like create this new persona of yourself that's not really you, and then you're not really able to express your true self just to
Right.
try and be with this person that's just not seeing you the way you necessarily want to be seen. And there are, like you said, other women, especially that go through that type of thing. And sometimes they're able to get out of that kind of relationship and try to move forward with their life. But sometimes they get drawn back and they really want to figure out how they can still please this person somehow. What would you say to women that have like come out of that type of a relationship, but they're still drawn to getting back into that relationship with that person? What can they do to navigate their situation?
Yeah, well, that specifically, the on again, off again relationship is an indication you are in what we call the anxious avoidant trap, which is where if you relate to what I was just describing, that's more, me being the people pleaser, that's more a hallmark of anxiously attached people. And the opposite on the spectrum of attachment is avoidant types who withdraw, who aren't as emotionally in tune. They are the ones who have rigid boundaries and they need their needs to get met in a relationship. And so anxious types are used to people pleasing and meeting other people's needs. And that's why they work at first. But they end up having a lot of conflict because anxious and avoidant types have opposing core needs. So anxious types need extra reassurance, that validation I was talking about, which is slightly different than reassurance, but for the sake of this, we're calling it the same thing. And then avoidant types need extra space. But what happens is that when they want to take their space, it triggers the anxious person who has the abandonment wound. And so they come for extra reassurance, which triggers the avoidant person who's like, oh, I just need my space. Like you're overwhelming me. I can't handle this emotionally. Right. And so it creates that on again, off again pattern because the people might really love each other. And that's the biggest, I think, barrier or point of confusion for people, and that I find in my clients, is that this isn't actually related to love. We need healthy attachment to sustain a loving relationship, but someone can care about you and actually love you, but not be able to give you what you need emotionally to sustain that relationship. And so the way they're showing up doesn't feel like they love you. Right. But often when there's an on again, off again thing, it's not about love. It's about you constantly triggering each other. And for me, like when you asked again, how did I navigate it? How did I get out of them? I think a few different things tend to happen in those relationships. So either they last and they become a dysfunctional relationship because the anxious person knows how to please the other person enough to hide their needs, to sacrifice their needs to keep that relationship going. Or, you know, the anxious person just pushes the avoidant person away to sometimes the point of ghosting or just ending it with them. Or the anxious person gets to a point where they're like, I can't handle this anymore. I can't deal with this. Like, I have to just not talk to you. And I have to, that's when, you block them on everything. You try not to think about them. And that's not you being avoidant. That's you protecting yourself finally, because you realize like this is a drug, right? How they say love is a drug sometimes. It's because in this particular dynamic, it's coming from a very, again, blind subconscious place where we become emotionally dependent on that person's validation. And so it's this push and pull, right? And so then, you have to move on, and it's this very dramatic thing. And, it's not like two secure people coming together and saying like, I don't think this is working. Like we work it out, we talk it out, we leave on friendly terms. Like that very rarely happens in this kind of dynamic, right?
Mm.
So the what I do with clients is I help them move into a more secure attachment style, because that's going to do one of two things. It's going to either help them attract more secure people who are more emotionally available, who are looking for a relationship, who value intimacy in relationships, right? And because, those secure people generally also want secure people. Secure types can get along with most types, but they don't have the same level of patience, right, for the on again, off again, because they want someone to be with, right? So when you become more secure with yourself, you and we can talk about what that means and how we do that, but when you become more secure, you start attracting more secure types. And so the clients who go through my program start realizing, oh, the quality of the people I'm dating is getting better and better because I'm becoming more secure in the process. I'm learning to communicate more securely, more vulnerably, more effectively, to speak my truth with more confidence, to set boundaries with more confidence, to know when something is a red flag or not, when I maybe used to sweep it under the rug. And so in doing that, you attract more secure people, or you become the secure person in the relationship, which inspires the more insecure person to meet you at your level, right? So attachment in general is a spectrum. So some people might be highly avoidant and dismissive, and those are going to be the people who, narcissists are highly avoidant in their attachment style. And people who maybe aren't diagnosably narcissistic, but have some narcissistic traits, they're going to be more on the dismissive avoidance spectrum. And so they are unable to learn and self-reflect to get to the place where they're going to be more secure. But someone who maybe, is in the middle of being secure and avoidant, or maybe they have some anxious traits where they have some of those fears of commitment, maybe, or they don't know how to express their needs sometimes, but they can learn it. But in order for that to happen, someone has to be the more secure person in the relationship, right? Otherwise, that anxious avoidant trap is what happens,
Right,
right?
right, right, right.
And so when they become more secure, everything starts with us becoming more secure with ourselves. It's what, the media or, the self-help world likes to call self-love. And that is definitely a component of being secure, but that to me is really, research backs this up, that it's called having a secure base. And when you have a secure base, then it inspires you and gives you permission basically to express yourself in a secure way, to show up securely. You start thinking more securely, and that really changes the dynamic of the relationships that you're in.
Right, right. And like, for people that like know that they're an attached kind of person and they've already come out of that type of a relationship and they've spent time by themselves practicing self-love and they feel more secure within themselves now. But they're still not confident that like if they get into another relationship that they're not going to get attached all over again. So they start looking at different relationship dynamics that will not necessarily get them so attached, possibly. They start looking at things like non-monogamy versus monogamy and things like that. So, in
Mm.
that context, what is your view on monogamy versus non-monogamy and how that relates to attachment and non-attachment?
I love this question, Kayo. I've never been asked it before, and it's a very important one, I think. So, the way I coach people in my program, first of all, for this very reason, because you hit on something really important, which is there's this belief that if I go and work on myself, right, I do the work, the self-development work, I get a therapist or a coach and I spend time by myself and I'm not dating and I get to know myself, then I'm gonna be in a better place so that when I start dating again, oh, I'm secure and I'm ready and I'm going to attract the right person. But exactly what you said is what actually happens is you do all this work by yourself and then you go date again and then all the same triggers come up and you're like, what happened? I spent all this time. And it's because to me, that's the first stage of the healing process of becoming secure is the awareness stage. That's the relationship with yourself, going through past relationships, you know, getting clear on what are the messages you're telling yourself about your worth, your lovability, your ability to set boundaries, your ability to even communicate with the people currently in your life, right? All of those things are that first step of healing, of growth within yourself. But what people miss is that second stage where you now have to take that healing and integrate it in a relationship with a real person. You have to take all that awareness you have and actually apply it because the real growth is not in your mind, right? We all can say in our mind what growth looks like, but to live it, to embody it within the relationship of another person is the next healing level, right? And we can only do that when we engage with someone because attachment wounds are not created just by yourself. Attachment wounds are a result of your relationship to another, right?
Right,
So they
right,
can only be healed in relationship to another. So when I have people in my program, what they start doing is I encourage them to talk to multiple people. And I say talk to because when I say date multiple people, it sounds scary because no one's saying you should be sleeping around or you should be getting really serious with people and not telling them what's going on. But I think part of the problem when we get blindly attached and we start romanticizing is because we have this narrative in our head, that fantasy of I'm looking for the one, right? And they're going to be this magical person who's going to just understand me completely and everything's going to be perfect. And, you know, and we all know realistically, like it doesn't happen that way, even for people who have experienced love at first sight, which is a very small percent of the population.
right.
It's not the way it's painted in movies. And don't get me wrong, I love a rom-com. I'm a romantic girl, like all the way. But I think that this is really a disservice to ourselves when we think this way. And so when we are just you know, allowing ourselves to just go after the people that we're interested in. Like if you ask someone who's anxiously attached, they'll say, well, I don't like people easily, but when I do, I fall hard. That
Right.
was always my thing, you know? And that's because we're falling for the people who we get that very guttural spark feeling with, those butterflies, and we start projecting the fantasy onto them. And so what happens is, especially anxiously attached people become very preoccupied. That's actually the you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of, I don't know if this is accurate saying it, the clinical title, but the official title of the anxious style is anxious preoccupied, because we become very preoccupied with that person. We start falling very hard and very fast, becoming attached very fast. And so if you're only talking to one person, you have a higher chance of romanticizing that, of putting them on a pedestal, and of playing out that same dynamic you've always played out before. So I really encourage people to date, to talk to people so that you can compare who is showing up for you, who is able to meet your needs. You know, if you have a situation come up, like I have a lot of single moms I work with. And so sometimes they'll see how one person they're talking to reacts to them when they talk about their kids versus how another person reacts, and that can give them more context as to who do I really want to introduce my children to, because a lot of single moms feel like I'm a package deal. Like, if you're going to want to be with me, you're going to have to be okay with my kids. And they can sense that when they're talking to multiple people, as just an example, right? And it's actually really good for our confidence when we're talking to multiple people, because it helps us to feel desired in a new way, right? And it's also helps build up what I call your rejection tolerance or your resilience for when someone you like isn't responsive in the way you want, because you have other people to focus on.
Right.
So for multiple reasons, especially if you're anxiously attached, it's really important to talk to multiple people. And that's actually really hard for anxiously attached people to do, because they become really attached to one person and they just want that to talk to that one person. It can be a big barrier for them. So, that's not exactly non-monogamy. It's, a roadmap to lead to monogamy.
Right.
I think non-monogamy can also work, but I think there's a misconception with non-monogamy, like you said, that it's the antithesis to attachment. Like, oh, if I have multiple people, then I'm not going to be attached. And my best friend is non-monogamous, and I can tell you right now that's not true. You just become attached to multiple people in different ways, and it takes more security, because you have to navigate multiple intimate relationships and have even more communication because of that, So it's not really the answer to dealing with attachment. It's just, if you think that's the right choice for you for other reasons, I think it's also a lifestyle choice, but it's not because you don't want to be attached, because that's not the answer to that. And just to reiterate too, like, attachment is healthy. Like, we need healthy attachment. I talk about relationships. I call it the tree of love. Are you familiar with, like, the tree of life? That
Yes.
image of where there's, like, you can see the roots of the tree and the trunk and the leaves. I call it the tree of love. And I say that, most people look at the tree of love and they date from the top down. They look at the leaves first, which are like the beauty, right? Someone's attractiveness, someone's how tall they are, if they have nice teeth, what cool job they have, and then I say the branches are the really important parts of relationships. Like, do you both want kids? How do you want to live your life? What's your financial, status together? Do you see money the same way? Those are the big branches of a romantic relationship. The trunk is what I call the friendship. You need to have that base of core of friendship, of shared values, of enjoying your time together, right? Of trust. But the roots are your attachment roots. So that's really feeling safe with someone. That's feeling like they're responding to you, feeling like it's reciprocal, feeling like you can be yourself with them. And if you don't have those roots, just like a tree, it's not going to last, right? So we really need to look from the roots up, right? We need to date paying attention to how safe we feel first. And that's like the kind of reframe that I do with people. Um, and I'm forgetting what you asked me that made me say that.
Yeah, I mean, you've answered the question pretty well anyway. But I did want to speak on like, like when people, I think the core of it is people lose their sense of self, like people that are anxiously
Mhm.
attached. The main problem is that they lose their sense of self when they get in a relationship. How can they actually let themselves be immersed in a relationship without necessarily losing their sense of self in that process? I think if they could get to the core of that, that would be helpful to them. In your opinion, how could they really get into a relationship without necessarily losing their sense of self in that process?
That's a good question. I think without losing your sense of self, you have to first know yourself, right? And excuse me.
No problem.
Um, and I think, especially with anxiously attached types, what I'll say we struggle with, because I'm anxiously attached, I've moved into being more secure over the years, but that's still my like go-to style, is that we don't trust ourselves and we change ourselves to please other people. And so when you do that, sometimes it's hard to know who you really are, right? But the real struggle for anxious types is being able to validate your own feeling, to be able to say, like, no, I'm entitled to feel this way, right? Um, as soon as someone gets upset at us, we feel shame, like, oh, we did something wrong. I can't handle someone being mad at me. I can't handle someone being upset at me. And so we pretend would not to feel that way, or we get really, really upset at them and like push them away because we've been maybe holding in our feelings for so long. That's a very classic anxious move, is to, you know, oh, I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to say too much. I'm going to hold it in. I'm going to hold it in. But then we get to a point where we get so upset that it all comes out and we're passive aggressive, or we're really um explosive, and then that like freaks the person out, or especially if they're not secure, right? And in doing all of those things, we're not being who we really are, right? We're not sharing our truth. We're not sharing how we really feel because we don't inside ourselves think we can, right? We think we've pushed our needs down so much for fear that if we share them, someone will leave, that we're not being honest even with ourselves about what we need. And I think that's the really key part. And that's why I think attachment is the key to unlock it all, because attachment forces us to look at what we need and understand what we need on a really deep core level.
Right.
And and I teach people to live from that space, to talk to yourself and ask yourself what you need in each situation that's going to make you feel more comfortable. And in doing that and living from that space, it allows you to be who you really are, not your idea of who you want to be or your idea of what you think that person needs you to be, but who you are in terms of how you're feeling. But that only works if you are validating that you're entitled to that feeling. Does that make
Excellent. Yeah,
sense?
yeah, definitely makes sense. Yeah, and like that was a great way to close it up, and because we have come to the end of the time as well. But Taryn, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything that you shared. Where could people find you, find out more about you, find out more about what you do?
Yeah, I think the best place for people to find me is probably Instagram first. And that's at underscore truer love underscore, or my website, truerlove.com. And you can send me a message at either place, and I'd be happy to respond and talk about different options for working with me, or just if you have questions. I always love to meet new people and engage.
Excellent. And for the viewers, all of that information is going to be in the description, so you can get in touch with Taryn and find out more about what she does. Once again, thank you so much for coming on, Taryn. Any final words before we wrap up?
Just, you know, you are enough as you are. And uh, and I hope that learning your attachment style helps you embrace yourself and approach yourself with compassion, and know that even if you haven't found love yet, or it hasn't happened for you, it's never too late.
Excellent. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Taryn.
Thank you.